All right. We're rolling.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Hi, Alex.
Hey, David. Or good to see you or good not to see you. But anyway.
Good not to see you, too. For our viewers, I am right now in a producer's office at CBS Sunday Morning, where I frequently work. I'm very, very happy to have the space. It is a tad shambolic, but I hope it will give you a little flavor of how things work here. So, Alex, 2 years ago, you were out there. Of course, you should be out there this year. What was it like at the time when you went out for your nomination for Taxi to the Dark Side?
It was good. I mean, I had, a previous experience which left me ready for that one, which I was nominated for Enron, the smartest guys in the room. And the first time around, I was much more full of myself, and I hit the red carpet, and I thought everybody was going to want to talk to me, and sure enough, the photographer beckoned me over right away, and I thought, see, this is my close-up. And I got close to him. He said, will you please get the hell out of the way? Jennifer Aniston is coming. So the second time around, I was much more prepared for what was likely to happen.
Yeah, that was a Taxi to the Dark Side on its own. So you went out there. Did you have any inkling that maybe Taxi to the Dark Side was gonna pick it up?
I had an inkling, but I was one of the very few. I venture to say I broke just about every Oscar pool going. I was definitely not the favorite, but I was delighted that it happened, and I confess also I was pleased that I was able to deliver my speech in precisely the amount of time, because I was determined that I was not going to get the music was not going to start for me.
So you got in and out. So what happened after the award?
What do you mean? Right after?
What happened?
Right after.
King for a Day. What happened?
Oh, I must say that is fantastic. First of all, you go and you give this speech to a kind of a camera like this one, where you thank everybody you forgot to thank, up on the stage. And I didn't really thank anybody. I dedicated it to people, but you thank everybody. And then you get rushed off. You get rushed off with a series of rooms, and suddenly beautiful women in low-cut gowns are handing you martinis. It's like what I imagine heaven to be like. And then quickly, though, it became a kind of, I was ready for anything, but you go into the press room, and suddenly there are all these people there. This, seems like phalanxes of press, and they all have numbers. It's like an auction. And, our win was late in the evening, but, there was like, any questions for winner for best documentary? And mind you, this was best documentary for a film about torture. And nobody, you could hear a pin drop in that room, because everyone was waiting for best actor and best director. So.
Oh.
But not
even the Afghani press?
Yeah, I think they may have been embargoed. There was one question. My co-producer was Australian, so there was the one question from the Australian press. Anybody wanted to, send words back to Melbourne. That was one question. But the fun thing though afterwards, we went from party to party, which was a blast. And I've never been the victim of paparazzi, but if you hold that statue up on that one night and walk anywhere, you're blinded. People spot you. We went to the No Country for Old Men party and saw Javier Bardem, lip syncing with his Oscar to Sympathy for the Devil. That was a great moment. But walking in and out of that, people want to take your picture with the statue, and I was blinded. I was literally blinded with all the paparazzi photographs. So we partied all night. It was fantastic. So
and was it? This is going to be my last question, vicarious thrill question, which is that did you, in the course of your Oscar sojourn, get to meet other filmmakers that whose work that you loved and was important to you, and did they respond to your film?
They did, fiction and nonfiction. I guess the biggest thrill for me was chatting at the Oscar bar. Then there was a couple of really nice bars right outside the theater itself, where you can go and hang out during the commercial breaks. And I was chatting out there with Julie Christie, who had been an idol of mine when I was growing up. I used to look at her and Dr. Zhivago and just go, oh my God. But she was great. Not only is she still so very beautiful, but really smart. And she was wearing one of these orange ribbons that the ACLU was handing out that was meant to protest Guantanamo and ongoing torture. And she had a lot to say. She was very smart. So I had a wonderful conversation with her. She had seen Taxi, liked it very much. So I was delighted. And I had seen her film, that extraordinary performance.
Away from her, yes.
Oh, my
Sarah
God.
Polley directed.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And I had actually a chance to see Sarah Polley and chat with her about it. That was great, too. That was a wonderful, wonderful film. And having, had a family member recently go through Alzheimer's, I found it very moving. So it was great.
Well, this year, now I'm, of course, on record as saying that I think Client 9 ought to have been in this particular pool of documentary nominations, given that it's not. Can you say anything about the films that are? I confess I have not seen all 5. Have you?
I have.
Oh, you must have, because you're a voter, aren't you?
Well, you can only vote if you have seen all 5 and in a theatrical context, unless you're a member of the Academy and you're one of the, if you're one of the pool of people that is supposed to be part of the nominating process.
Right.
But anyway, I have seen all 5. It's an interesting selection this year, and it kind of shows a new look for the Academy, particularly the nomination of 2 films. Gasland, which is very much of a homemade film.
Yes. Very
low budget. With some really shocking and wonderful material about people lighting their faucets on fire. It's about fracking. And then the other big surprise to ongoing observers of the Documentary Academy is Exit to the Gift Shop.
I know, boy, you didn't think that would get in there, did you?
Never. Because going back into the old days where, it had to be a Holocaust documentary in order to get nominated. Now, this is one that kind of calls the whole documentary enterprise into question. And so it's very interesting that it's nominated. And I frankly think, given the mood this year, that it's kind of co-equal favorite with Inside Job to win the Oscar, because everybody wants to see. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think you're right. I think it could walk off with it, or steal off with it.
Right, and everybody wants to see what's going to happen if it wins. So who will show up?
Well, I understand that Banksy has been banned from the stage in whatever entity he wishes to appear. So
I see.
The Academy has laid down the law, alas. But it's interesting, to me what was interesting about that nomination was up until very recently, up until an LA Times investigative piece, I had a kind of a sneaking suspicion that a lot of that stuff was a hoax, was contrived. That character who took center stage in the film was kind of a creation of Banksy in order to spoof the snobbery and the philistinism of the art world. And Mr. Brainwash, I'm talking about. And I gather that's not the case.
Good. I didn't see the LA Times investigative piece. You don't know what kind of manipulation could have taken place behind the scenes. I think in a way that was probably part of the playful appeal. But, I'm not a big fan of films that intentionally try to deceive the audience without ultimately letting the audience in on the deception. I think it's too easy. People have been doing that for years and years and years, and every time it's supposed to be some breakthrough. I thought I was very interested in the film. The other film that wasn't nominated was Catfish, which is very similar about the sort of whole notion of what is truth and what is reality, which I found to be a very interesting film also. So it's good.
I found it an extremely moving film when I saw it, but afterwards I was in conversations with people and thinking back over it again. The question emerged: how much of this was contrived, how much of these people were pretending when they actually knew the story all along on camera. It raised, questions that we're going to see a lot more of these days about what is a hoax, what is faked in order to look spontaneous and what is in fact. I wonder if you were not the victim of prejudice against such things in Client 9 for choosing a device that I adored, which is casting an actress. Rather than taking one of your principal subjects and shrouding her, putting her in shadow and distorting her voice, you actually gave the interview to an actress to perform. And I thought she did brilliantly, and I was convinced that she was channeling the subject. Elliot Spitzer's, in fact, favorite hooker, who was not, whom you called Angelina, and who was not the divine Ashley Dupre. Do you think that maybe there was some prejudice against your film because of that device?
It's hard to know. Hard to divine the thoughts of the audience, but I do know there were members of the Academy who were troubled by it, which I do find odd. I mean, the device is disclosed. It's not hidden, and I don't think it's any more arbitrary than the device you suggest, which is shrouding somebody in shadow. There's no more guarantee that you're seeing the real McCoy, and I think that in this case it was much more close to the truth in terms of who that character was. A very appealing, very intelligent, very vibrant character. And you never would have got that seeing somebody in shadow with their face sort of metallically altered. So there was an example where we thought long and hard about the device, but we ultimately decided to go there because it was okay. We disclosed it. We weren't trying to pretend.
It was absolutely above board. Look, back in the day, I took an acting class once, a very good acting class, and we had to record people. We had to sit down opposite someone and record them. And then we would go up and we would essentially memorize the transcript of what they had said, shape it a little bit and memorize it. And it was uncanny when you just have that syntax, have their diction, have the memory of their voice in your head, how you're able to channel that person in a way that has a real artistic truth. And
That's
again,
right.
if you were not disguising it, if you are putting it out there, I thought it was a brilliant device.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And also, even that actress, I couldn't, for reasons of secrecy, I couldn't play the real Angelina's voice to the actress. I could just give her the transcript and give her direction. But even so, she was really good. And we did have the real Angelina showed up at the premiere screening of the film at the Tribeca Film Festival, and she pronounced herself gobsmacked. She said, "Those are my words being spoken, but that person doesn't. It's not me, but she's very much like me." So
Wow.
everybody seemed happy.
Ooh,
Anyway.
I wish I'd been sitting there for that moment. Well, let's talk about the rest of the Oscars.
Absolutely.
From my perspective, it seems. Oh, let's just go on record. You think it's going to be between Inside Job, which is also a brilliant film, Exit What was interesting about Restrepo? I liked it a lot when I saw it, but then I read Sebastian Junger's book, War, which he is about the same things that he was shooting, and I was struck by how much more I was getting from his prose than I was getting on screen. How much more context, how much more thoughtful. I mean, the film itself is, it's kind of dumb to call someone amateurish when they're dodging bullets, but I found actually a lot of the filmmaking kind of frustrating and a lot of the gaps not filled in the film itself. Although
that was my issue. That was my issue with the film. In fact, I heard Sebastian and Tim Hetherington give a Q&A after a screening of Restrepo, and I was riveted by their Q&A. And I thought, geez, why isn't that Q&A in the movie? I mean, why didn't
Yeah.
they find, and there are a lot of ways to get that information in. You know, you can set your own rules, but I was frustrated by that. And they claim, look, it's just a slice of life. That's just what we're showing. We're just showing.
Yeah.
But I don't buy that argument, because the fact is everything's a slice of life. What does that mean? I mean,
Right.
you're constructing a film, and a film has got to be a fulfilling cinematic experience. And I think they cheated us by not giving us enough of a sense of context of what those guys were going through. So
I agree, and you know, it's funny, even the little details about why the men had red beards and little things that are filled in the book that are contextualized bring, I think, the images on screen alive. So anybody who loves the movie, I suggest going out and reading War by Sebastian Junger and then watching the movie again. But of course, any movie that needs a book to round it out, I don't think is fully successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should very often should be the other way around. You get provoked by the film, and then you want to go read the book. But anyway, let's. I don't want to. Those are my colleagues. I don't want to spend too much time on that. But it's. I was frustrated in the same way. But here's my guilty pleasure now. I want to move to some of the other categories
Okay, please.
and dig in there. What's your best picture this year? By the way, I have to tell you about one thing. You turned me on to a movie in your year's best, which is not on this list. It's a wonderful, wonderful Italian film called Vincere.
Oh,
What a movie that is.
Yes.
Wow. And it's not only about Mussolini and Mussolini's mistress and the abuse of power, but it's also about filmmaking and the making of images. And
it's
how,
about manipulation.
That's
it's
right.
about filmmaking. It's about actually transforming society through, with symbols, with images,
That's
with
right.
film.
Which is interesting about some of the themes of this year's Oscar, the idea of image making. I mean, that's something we probably all pay more attention to, how we're guided and manipulated by images. And what is the truth and what is real, and the debate about WikiLeaks and all of this stuff. But it's in, I think, some of the movies, and even some of the movies that aren't about the manipulation of images are also about the kind of reflection of images that we're getting all the time. There was something I liked very much about the film 127 Hours, which was the brilliant use, I thought, of the small video camera and the diaristic way that that the hiker was talking into it. And I was actually involved for a while in a documentary version of that book, possibly. And it's a very hard thing to pull off. I mean, that's a really extraordinary feat, what Danny Boyle did, I think, in that film, and James Franco. But the use of the different kinds of imagery, and also talking into the camera as a diary, and then you see him from inside and out. How do you see yourself? How do others see you? I thought it was great.
Well, I actually think that was, though, the most honest way in the film that Danny Boyle used. I mean, obviously, he didn't want to be trapped there with his protagonist. He needed another perspective. He needed another stock, a video stock. And, that was a very honest way, as opposed to some of the more fractured syntax parts of the movie. But I agree. It was brilliant. So was that your favorite of the year?
Hard to know. I mean, it was one of my favorites. I'm torn. It's always hard to pick a best picture. If I had to pick one, may surprise you, I'd probably pick Toy Story 3. I love that movie.
It was right up there for me, too.
And it doesn't get talked about a lot, as animated films never do, but it was very moving, a film about loss. And, as a parent who's seeing his kids leave, I thought about that stuff a lot. It was very stirring, that film.
I mean, among other things, it's a film about aging and death. And
That's
I think
right.
that people, many of the slapstick gags, hang on that. And I mean, it's about many other things too, but it's. It takes a lot of the tropes that some of us remember from our childhoods, down to the fact that the villain almost sounds like Burl Ives, who I used to listen to a lot,
Right.
singing as a kid. Suddenly he's this totalitarian dictator who is attempting to keep all the toys in line. But then, of course, it's about children moving out. It's very much a parent's perspective, which is unusual for Pixar, which is often has a more child, comes at it more from the child's
That's
side.
right. I agree. So I thought it was a very powerful film.
Yeah. Well, my favorite film of the year was Winter's Bone, which I thought was
Very powerful film. Yep.
An extraordinary piece of work. Many people say, "Oh, it's so depressing." I found it exhilarating. I found the fact is that she moved through this nightmare and came out the other side in a way that I found, I hate to use this word about a movie I love, which is inspiring, because usually when you say inspiring, it's one of these go for it movies, and I guess it is a go for it movie in a very, very dark way. But she embarks on this mythical odyssey. Ree Dolly, played by Jennifer Lawrence.
Right.
Now, of course, the movie has no shot. We should probably say right off the bat that as far as I can tell, I'm not a voter and I'm not in Los Angeles, but it seems as if the top 6 categories, at least the top 5, are virtual locks as far as we know. I will be very surprised if The King's Speech does not win for Best Picture.
Right.
I think I will drop dead if Colin Firth doesn't win.
Yes.
Natalie Portman seems to have it in the bag, alas.
You don't think that Annette Bening is a dark horse there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously, I would be over the moon if Annette Bening won, although I thought she was even better in a movie called Mother and Child that had no traction this year, that Rodrigo Garcia directed. I would be over the moon. I just think with Natalie Portman, it's just a case where the acting shows, where the cost to the actress shows, and they really go for that there. When someone starves themselves and trains and then suffers on camera to that extent, whenever you can see the acting, those are the performances that tend to win awards.
I agree, and it's because in the Best Supporting Actor category, there's another case there. For example, you can really see the acting with Christian Bale's performance in the film. But for my money, the far more compelling supporting actor performance was Jeremy Renner's performance in The Town. I was riveted by that.
Amazing.
Unbelievable.
Is he amazing in that movie? He walks away with that movie. He's one of the most frightening and convincing sociopaths I have ever seen on screen.
Yeah, because you can't predict what he's going to do, and you see it in his eyes, and he could come out and slit your throat in the next second, and you would know that you had no preparation for it, but you can see in his eyes that he's capable of it at any second. So
one of the interesting things about his performance in The Hurt Locker and in The Town, one reason I love him as an actor is that he doesn't signal anything. He doesn't frame the character. He is really living in the moment and acting as the character would act without dramatizing it in a way, or without telegraphing it. So this guy really seems like he will do anything to survive. And in his definition of the world, survival could easily include slitting somebody's throat who represents even a momentary threat to him.
That's right. See a witness. There's a witness to the crime. Probably smartest thing is just to take her out.
Yep. I also happen to love John Hawkes as Uncle Teardrop, the tortured methamphetamine addict in Winter's Bone, and I'm very pleased, since his profile has been low, that he was nominated. That was kind of my thrill. Christian Bale is another case where you see the acting, you see the weight loss. There's an accent that's obviously not his, Lowell, Massachusetts, kind of a little bit similar to Boston, but different enough. And the Boston accent tends to be a kind of quicksand for actors.
Yes.
And the fact that the actors in The Fighter pretty much got by with it is unusual I think in Hollywood movies. Mark Wahlberg, of course, is from South Boston, but he still had to adapt his accent a little bit for Lowell. Tom Schoen, the wonderful writer, had a column recently in which he said, he talked about Robert De Niro in Raging Bull, of course, and he talked about Christian Bale, and he said, in some sense it's not acting, it's morphing.
Right.
But the Academy, I don't know why they responded to it. So many of them are actors themselves, and they know that some of the greatest acting is when you don't see the acting.
That's right.
but they tend to go for the very showy, transformative, morphing performances, and that's why I think also Melissa Leo is has it in the bag as well. Because
Yeah, even though Amy Adams was so, in a way, was so much more powerful, but it wasn't the showy performance. I mean, look, the Melissa Leo
it was
performance
showy,
was
but
great.
it was. I loved Amy Adams. That was my favorite performance too. But I mean, she was great. She was such a mouthy broad, and she. Her Irish was always up, and it was just a wonderful. She was wonderful, but I think Melissa Leo is somebody who really never looks the same from
Right.
role to role.
Right.
It's often her features. She's an attractive woman, but she has very kind of an ordinary attractiveness, and she really she was in another movie this year called Conviction. I didn't know it was her until I saw the credits. And
She's a
she
great.
is-
I mean, look, she's a great actress. I feel like I could never take anything away from her. She's very powerful.
Yeah, and she's a big scenery chewer, and
Yeah.
and she chewed the scenery in this, and she got away with it big time. And I just think that both these categories, the fighter has it. Now, the reason I said the King's Speech,
Is that a film you didn't like?
Well, I thought it was okay. I didn't love The Social Network. I thought it was good. I didn't find it the defining movie of the decade, as certain critics, Peter Travers, said. But I think that it's. I gather Harvey Weinstein has been working the old farts pretty hard.
Sure.
And is really relying on this kind of discomfort with our brave new, this dang internets thing. What are all these kids and this lousy punk who becomes a billionaire, and how are we supposed to feel about him? And
Right.
what is the movie saying exactly? And whereas there's no doubt about what the King's Speech is saying.
Sure.
The other thing I think about the King's Speech is that it's a disguised Jewish psychotherapy movie, even though Jeffrey Rush is not a Jew. In my book, he's an honorary Jew. He doesn't really work on the marbles. He comes in, and you have this uptight, anal retentive wasp who has never stood up to his father, and through therapy, through psychotherapy, through going back to his childhood, he is taught to be kind of anal expulsive, kind of swear, use scatological language, and find his voice. And therefore, it is basically the triumph of psychotherapy, which is a theme that I think is very near and dear to the Academy's hearts, even if they don't recognize the movie precisely as that.
Yeah, I confess that I was. This was a movie that surprised me, I guess, in a good way, in the sense that I so hate the royals. I mean, they just make me ill. They remind me of those sort of inbred families in small villages in Vermont, who are always bumping into trees. I mean, I see nothing good about the royal family. So I was expected to hate this film, but then I came out rather liking it, and I must say, for a small film, I thought actually Tom Hooper did a pretty good job of directing it. He did a couple of interesting things with the camera, which are pretty subtle. But where the classic framing of something, if I'm looking off this way, I think this is going to work. It's hard for me to tell, but you're supposed to look. The camera's supposed to give you more space where you're looking, right? Whereas he did it the opposite, where he gives you less space where you're looking. In other words, and the result is it makes you uncomfortable in a way that's very subtle, but quite powerful. So there's some things that Hooper did in terms of directing the camera in that film, even though it's really all about the actors, that I found very impressive.
On the other hand, though, there are those scenes in which he cuts back and forth between Colin Firth, who is on the right-hand side of the screen, and Jeffrey Rush, who is on the far left side of the screen. And I really thought that he had, gone to filmmaking school at Wimbledon or something. He seemed to have, that was his idea of drama, that struck me as very odd and actually kind of amateurish, if I may say. But you're right, the rest of the film made, very brilliant use of
It's interesting we're talking about that because the two films were very much the top two, and you're probably right that King's Speech is going to win. But the other big film, Social Network, is also defined by a conversation, a very cutty conversation,
right.
Between the girlfriend and Zuckerberg right at the beginning, which was allegedly shot in a titanic number of takes, but very powerfully edited and very well written, and it's talking heads. That's what you're never supposed to do. But both these films have succeeded rather well, I think, in terms of making talking heads fun, which I think is interesting. Inception for me was a spectacular film with all these visual effects. It left me cold. And I did find it interesting this year that at least I was engaged by those two films.
Careful, you're going to get some hate mail from the fanboys.
Right.
I sure did. Yeah, I mean, I thought, I don't know. I kind of thought Inception was dead on the screen. Because I didn't care, because I wasn't drawn into the vision at all. But some people were.
And I was a big fan of of his earlier films. I really loved the film he did called Insomnia.
Insomnia. I was about to say. You know what's interesting? He had a different editor on Insomnia.
Oh, really?
He and I actually think his editor right now is kind of clunky. It's and he wasn't nominated, by the way, which some people were surprised by, because Insomnia is edited to within an inch of its life. All the work is done through editing, really. And but Insomnia is cut in a way to really unnerve you, and it really gets into your bloodstream, which of course the movie has to do to be effective. The combination of Pacino's kind of seething face and the very, very good cinematography and extremely shrewd and subtle editing. I wish I remembered the name of the editor. She's a woman, and I cannot remember her name, but it's an odd name. But she's really good, and I wish he still worked with her.
He's got another secret weapon, which is Wally Pfister. I think Wally Pfister is a very talented cinematographer. Yeah. He's done a really good job for him.
Yeah, that's true too. Well, speaking of cinematography, now it seems to be Roger Deakins' award to lose this year. He's never won. He's a great cinematographer. Certainly, True Grit is the kind of the depth, the starkness of the images they're both classically Western and true to the Coen's peculiar malignant universe.
I wouldn't be unhappy if he won. I think he's an unbelievably talented cinematographer. Is there somebody else on the list that you're more inclined toward?
Well, I think I'm not, but the guy who there are a lot of people I know who like the guy who shot Black Swan.
Yeah. Whose
name I've forgotten. Who certainly Black Swan. People sometimes get confused because I say it's the movie is a triumph, a tour de force. It accomplishes everything that Darren Aronofsky set out to do, and it's totally idiotic. And but in fact it is. I mean, there is somebody shooting for something and nailing it. I don't really respect what he was going for, and I think the movie is just packed with cliches and sort of borderline camp. But the cinematography is, on its own terms, quite brilliant.
I also liked what he did, and in a way, it was a kind of an extension of some things I think he learned on The Wrestler. There is a very unnerving documentary quality to some of the dancing sequences, where the camera is not classical in any sense. It's always moving, sometimes very much behind the character, and in a way that's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's sort of spy-like, but also puts you in the seat of the person at the same time and keeps you on edge, which I found very compelling. The camera is very much of a participant. It's a dancer in the dance, which I liked.
Absolutely. I mean, it both reflects her point of view, and it creates barriers between her and us at the same time. So.
Right, and it makes us rather uncomfortable at times, feeling voyeuristic.
Yes.
Yeah, even though
we're simultaneously inside her head
and outside,
and at the same time looking at her and judging her and and it's yes, it's a powerfully discomforting film for all sorts of reasons. The the other category, the other interesting thing is that there might be a separation this year, a rare separation between director and picture.
Yes.
Insofar as Hooper is someone who is not well known, and Fincher is, has been proclaimed, Hollywood's new kind of auteur god. Do you think that Fincher is going to get the prize this year?
I do. I think he will get the prize. I don't think, I shouldn't say I don't think there's any question, but I think he will get the prize. I think, and I'm not sure I agree, but I think he is a talented director, and I think he'll get the prize.
Yeah. Well, I definitely don't agree, but I think I can understand the thinking there, and maybe it would make the Academy voters feel less old-fashioned, less fuddy-duddy to cast a vote for The King's Speech and for David Fincher at the same time, and then they can also cast a vote for the screenplay of The Social Network and the screenplay of The King's Speech, since they're not competing.
That's true. That's
against
true.
each other.
That's
and
true.
I
did think the screenplay for The Social Network was brilliant. I thought it was great. It's hard to make a film about a subject like that, economic or ambition in a way that doesn't involve car chases or it's very hard. Having made a film once about mark-to-market accounting, I feel their pain, and I think they should get some credit for that. But I don't feel, I also don't think that Social Network was some kind of heaven-sent treasure. It's a good movie.
It was a good business movie, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a good business saga. Doesn't happen to be necessarily true to the actual guy, and to me it's reductive in that it basically says, the entire reason that we have Facebook is because some guy wanted to get revenge on his girlfriend and get back at the guys who kept him out of finals clubs. I find it a little reductive toward Zuckerberg, who seems to be a more mysterious creature than he's portrayed on screen. But it's a good business saga. And and the writing is, it has that kind of headlong, almost screwball pace to it.
Yes.
Even though it's at the same time somewhat alienating. It does not, none of the characters truly endear themselves to.
No, and in fact, there seems to be a generational divide on this. I mean, my son wasn't as offended by the Zuckerberg character as I was. When I say offended, I mean I didn't regard him as portrayed in the movie as anything but malicious.
Right.
And but it's not easy making a film about a guy who's not inherently likable. That's also difficult. And I appreciate it though, because I tend to be more interested in perps than victims or heroes.
Actually, I think it's funny because I think a lot of kids may see that movie and say, well, it's a small price to pay for $1 billion, not having any friends, because he can certainly get some friends now.
Later, that's right. He can buy. He can pay for them. Right.
I mean, no, but, it seems like a pretty darn good investment, I don't think he's having any problem getting a girlfriend now.
Yeah, so, it's a bottom line. I mean, it's a little bit scary that way. And in a sense, it also does prove a kind of hidden worth to the film, that it's kind of touched people differently in that way in terms of how we think about ambition and whether it's a problem to not care about anything else but the bottom line. There's only success and failure. It's the law of the jungle. You just go for it. And if you have to, eat a few sheep along the way, so be it.
Well, in that sense, maybe it is a defining movie for the day.
Yeah, I think in that way it is. It does earn its place as something which has something larger to say. I reflected on it afterwards and thought, I mean, the problem I had with the film is the problem that you suggest, which is it's always tricky when you're dealing with real people and then you also want the real people to conform to the needs of the fiction, where you want to take that fiction, and I think there are issues there. Now, not that even in a documentary, you don't shade things in ways which conform to your own point of view. Of course you do, but in this case, you are dealing with real people. Were they treated correctly? I suspect that the real Mark Zuckerberg is not as big a monster as portrayed in the film, but maybe not. I don't know.
He had a girlfriend the whole.
That's right.
Actually had a girlfriend the whole time.
That's right. So. That's right. So that's a difference, and I think
there's a lot that's different, but at the same time, there is something kind of interesting about spending that much time with a character and really not being resolved on how we feel about him.
Yes.
I mean, there's so many gray areas, unlike, and I don't know if you want to comment on this, a movie like Casino Jack, the fictional, in which there is just absolutely no doubt what you're supposed to think, to the point where it's just, okay, we get it already after about 2 minutes of the film, what you're supposed to think about this guy and the guy he surrounds himself. It's kind of, that's a film that's completely pre-chewed. Everything is, there's absolutely nothing left for you as an audience member to bring to it.
That's right. And you do, in Social Network, really do get into the character and try to seek out the mystery of who this person is. Maybe better if I don't comment on Casino Jack, though. It is an interesting problem. It also becomes a problem, in the documentary world, ironically. People seem to like stories that are more black and white. That they seem to come to expect that from documentary, and It's harder to make documentaries that draw you in and don't draw easy conclusions.
That, of course, is what happens in the Spitzer movie,
right?
Which is what is so fascinating. He insists that, in fact, it was his own responsibility. You create a situation where there are certainly other interpretations for his downfall, and I think probably more compelling than the ones he'll admit to on screen. It's a fascinating weave or tangle, as the case may be.
And I think you're left at the end not knowing quite what. There are more questions than answers at the end, which I find I was led there by accident, but I found intriguing.
Well, I actually had very few questions myself, and I'm not sure that you have all that many, but for legal reasons, probably one can't really spell out a scenario as to what happened to Elliot Spitzer without.
I guess just what I meant. What I meant by that was that there's no question that he did what he did. But then you have to begin to explore how you think about why he was discovered, why he was outed, and what you think about that, and how you hold people accountable. Those are the kinds of questions that aren't quite so easy to resolve. But yeah,
exactly. As well as reconciling things inside his own character.
Yeah, and as well as us all reconciling how we feel about fidelity, infidelity, public, private, those issues.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, before we close out, is there anything else about the upcoming Academy Awards that you want to talk about? Any other particular films that have struck you this year that are nominated for something?
Yeah, there's a couple of ones we should mention, because now's the time. These films get nominated, and you don't often get to see them. In the Best Supporting Actress category, there's this woman, Jackie Weaver, nominated for Animal Kingdom, an Australian crime film about a crime family, which I quite like. It's very dark, but I would urge people to take a look. I
agree. She's incredible. I found the movie really, really kind of disgusting. But
why? Because the people were so disgusting?
Sorry?
Because the people were so disgusting?
Yeah, I also was there is a murder in the film that I found nearly impossible to watch and almost too shocking within the context of the movie. Which
to me it was a film about environment and about a kid who was trying so hard to be good, and ultimately his goodness was squeezed out of him by the environment. And I found that aspect of the film to be very powerful. But Jackie Weaver's the mother is the most compelling character there because she's somebody who does such evil things and is always embracing them, cuddling up to them and kissing them, and everything's okay. We're family. This is the family that kills anything in its way. And
she does make you think of Greek tragedy or something. She has that kind of mythic. There's that kind of mythic horror about how she treats her children,
and also very compelling performance in the sense that it's not scene chewing really. You get to the end and she's very much part of the universe in which she lives.
Right.
So, is there anything else? Who else should we...
What about? I suppose animation. Toy Story 3 is going to, of course, win that prize.
Yes.
And I haven't actually seen all of the foreign films in competition because they, some of them have not opened yet commercially for me to review.
What'd you think of the score for Social Network?
Well, sometimes I thought it was in a kind of ambient Brian Eno airport of its own, but certainly it was the most original score I've heard in a long time, and I don't think it's going to win.
No, you don't think so? I think it is.
I keep hearing that Hans Zimmer's grandiose chords for Inception is
that would be depressing.
I would agree with you, though. I think it will win, but the Social Network. But everybody tells me it's going to be Inception.
You agree with me that you think it should win, but you don't think it will win.
I'm not resolved on it. I think I would need to watch the movie again and listen to the music more carefully. I found it a little bit like the movie. I found it sometimes slightly non-committal in terms of what was going on.
But isn't that what the movie's supposed to be doing?
Yes, I guess so. I guess so. I was very frustrated with how kind of dodgy the movie was. On one hand, you have a movie like Casino Jack that overinterprets everything,
right? And
on another hand, you have a movie at the other extreme like The Social Network, where I keep looking for a little bit more of an artist's organizing. In artistic clarity, but I realize that's not Fincher's way, and that's not in this case Sorkin's way. Especially not Fincher's way.
Right.
So okay. I mean, yes, it definitely brings something to the film that would not otherwise be there. It adds a dimension to the film.
What do you think of The Kids Are All Right as a movie?
I thought it was one of the most enjoyable sitcoms I've ever seen, and my criticism is implicit in that statement. It is a situation comedy, and no more believable than many of them, but on its own terms, extremely entertaining, and as a political statement, kind of fun to contemplate. Look, we can be a more square family than one with a mother and father.
Right.
So, did you like it?
I did. I liked it, and I liked it because it was fun. And I also really enjoyed Annette Bening's performance. That scene around the dinner table where she's singing Joni Mitchell, and then finds the evidence of the infidelity. It was really good. I really enjoyed that film. For me, it was a lark because it was just so much fun, as you say. It was a bit sitcom-y, but it was fun.
I love Annette Bening because I think she's an actor's actor. I'm surprised she's never won an award because she plays actors insofar as we all, to an extent, are actors. But you can always see kind of the person presenting a persona to the world. In this case, it's a woman. She's a physician, but she's also playing, in conventional terms, the kind of patriarchal figure in the house.
Right.
And she's setting rules, and she is trying to project an image of herself, while at the same time she's kind of falling apart on the inside. She's drinking heavily. And you see the strain, the tension between the outside and the inside. And I think you do I think Annette Bening is remarkable in sort of locating the actor within every character that she plays.
Well, and that gets
illuminating that.
And it gets back to our theme for this year too, which is what is real and what is Memorex. What you see is not quite what you get, and that performance, I think, reflects that pretty well.
Before we go, Alex, what are you working on now?
I'm working on. I just finished the Lance Armstrong film, and I'm working on 2 films now. One has to be secret that I'm doing for HBO, and then the other one I'm doing on WikiLeaks, which is really fun.
Oh boy! So have you been contacted yet by the government, by the State Department?
They're probably listening to us right now. This has probably been a very disappointing conversation for them so far.
I was in Iceland for the Reykjavik Film Festival a few months back, and there was a great suspicion because I believe he was there somewhere at the time or very close by.
Julian?
There were a number of that not everyone who looked particularly Nordic was in fact from that area.
Well, it's funny that of course he comes from Australia. Here's this pallid guy who, would, by all accounts, well, not by all accounts, I know. I mean, he would rather be, all things considered, he would rather be back on Bondi Beach in Australia. Actually, he comes from Melbourne, but yeah, I think he'd like to be in the hot summer climate. But it's a really interesting story. It brings me back into the sex scandal world again, as well as issues of what is real and what is not. I mean, I think what's been exposed by WikiLeaks is tremendous. I think we're seeing how we're seeing behind the veil of the facade that is erected by the powerful, and it's I don't think we've even digested how much those documents, which are not actually leaked by him, they were
right, of course.
There's a guy in military prison now who is alleged to have leaked those documents, but they really do shed
Bradley Manning?
Bradley Manning, that's right.
Yeah. Harry Shearer, who does one of my favorite radio shows, Le Show,
yes.
He just has a regular feature on his show where he says, oh, yeah, WikiLeaks, yeah, the New York Times told us there really wasn't anything much new here. Here's one of the things that, that isn't supposed to be news. And you listen to it and you go, wait a minute, has this not been reported? I mean, the mainstream American press has not reported this? No, because there really isn't a lot of news in there.
Well, it's even more ironic than that because the New York Times, of course, has published an awful lot of news,
yes,
and they keep referring to WikiLeaks even as they beat Julian Assange over the head over and over and over again. Oh, he smelled like a bag lady. He smelled like a bag lady. I find that odd. I can't recall any time anytime ever where a newspaper has gone out of its way to trash a source so excessively. So I think that's very much of an identity crisis for the New York Times.
Well, I'm really, really looking forward to the film. And I want to thank you again for talking, our second Blogging Heads chat, and I hope we do it again.
Absolutely, David. Great to talk to you.
All right.
Take care.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.